Hi, my name is Craig Foster, and I'm the 2018 chairman of the Northwest Oklahoma City Chamber. Before we go any further, I'd like to ask Representative Tammy West to come forward to offer our invocation.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. Would you join me in praying? Father God, we come before you with hearts full of thanks. I know that in my life you've answered a lot of personal prayers today, and we're grateful. Father, you've given each of us roles to play, positions, jobs in our community. You've brought us together. For that we give thanks, Father. I ask, Lord, that we would be about building up and making better, that you would use us however you see fit, Father. But I thank you for each person here and for what they represent, for our community, for our state, and for our nation. I pray your blessings in your favor. I thank you for this food. Please bless the hands that prepared us. And Lord, I ask that you would protect us and use us, as I said, as we go forward. I ask this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Thank you so much, Representative West. I'd like to personally thank everybody for coming and taking time out of their busy schedule for this special event. And I would like to ask board members and ambassadors here today to stand for recognition. I want to thank each of you for your service to our organization. If we have any guests here, those are these folks. Please visit with the board members if you have any questions about the Northwest Oklahoma City Chamber. I'd also like to recognize our table sponsors today that made this event successful: Eric Lane and Christian Brothers Automotive, and City of Bethany. We have many upcoming events, too many to name, so Paige has a calendar of events up there if you'd like to take that with you today to update and update yourself and read about all that. I want to remind you about one special event, our biggest event of the year, the Northwest Chamber Taste of Northwest. It's this year is going to be at Wiley Post Airport at Atlantic Aviation, and the date is September 20th. We're still looking for auction items, event sponsors, and many more things for this 10th. It's the 10th year for the Taste of Northwest. So I encourage you all to participate in that and donate auction items and buy tables for that event. Moving quickly, it's now my opportunity to introduce our special guest, Congressman Steve Russell, a 21-year veteran. He went through the U.S. Army Ranger School and deployed to assignments around the world. During Operation Iraqi Freedom, Russell commanded the unit that played a key role in the capture of Saddam Hussein. Before retiring as Lieutenant Colonel, he earned the Legion of Merit, the Bronze Star of Valor device, and the Oak Leaf Cluster. Upon returning to Oklahoma, Russell served in the state Senate from 2008 to 2012. In addition to public speaking, he is founder and owner of an independent rifle manufacturing business. Elected to serve Oklahoma's 5th District in Washington in 2014, he also serves on the House Arms Service Committee as the Vice Chairman of the Government Oversight and Reform Subcommittee on National Security. He is also co-chairman of the Bipartisan Congressional Warrior Caucus. He and his wife Cindy make their home with their 5 children in Choctaw. Please welcome me in joining Congressman Steve Russell.
Well, thank you, Craig, and it's great to be with you today. It's good to be out and about in the district, and you can all sleep at night at least till Labor Day because we're not in Washington. America is safe, and we're good to go. I've always been heartened when I come home and just to get back out in the community, see what Oklahomans are up to, and you know, the mood is optimistic. Economically, Oklahoma is doing, yes, we have our volatile oil and gas as we always do, but our economy is diversifying more and more, and we need to continue to work on that effort so that we don't have businesses open and go bankrupt on the oil and gas industry. And part of that is our number two sector is aviation. Aviation is over 100 years old in Oklahoma. In fact, one of the very first airfields that was ever opened by the United States was Post Field, not to be confused with Wiley Post, but Post Field at Camp Sill, Oklahoma, which was actually Camp Doniphan at one time in 1917. And even before that, some of the first flight operations by the U.S. military, they launched from Post Field and they went down to the border war in 1916, and John Pershing used Curtis Jennings to conduct the first aerial operations. They launched out of Oklahoma, and so you know, we've had involvement in that regard for a long time, and they're anchoring industries. The other thing is that you know we continue to see our light manufacturing base diversify and improve, and we need to do more of that. But innovators, this morning, for example, sat down with some great folks that are looking on how do we draw more of the kind of the technical, the computer, the millennials that want to come in and create startups and do different things. We're seeing a change in the face of Oklahoma City, and that's a good thing. We don't want to be a district that just sits around and watches core industries continue to decline. And there's a lot of good news that's going on with that. Been out and visited a lot of companies that deal with steel and aluminum, kind of asking about, you know, how the tariffs and all of that, getting their feedback on that. And it's amazing the things that Oklahomans do every day that most of us don't know. One of the neat things about being a member of Congress is that you get to see so much as you go around and look at how our community works. And, I was down in Shawnee visiting George Fisher, not a man but a company, and they employ hundreds of people. And you use their products every day and just don't even know it. If you took a hot shower this morning or you turned on your natural gas stove or something of that nature, the pipes and elbows and conveyances that get that gas from the ground to your home are built by George Fisher. They've got the lion's share of the market in North America, and you use their products every day. Went out to WW Steel. You drive by it on the crosstown, have been for decades. But do you realize they have 80% of the steel fabrication market in the United States? Yeah, wow. I mean, it's amazing. And as you go out there and look at all of the things that they do, they have 14 subsidiaries nationwide. They've built everything you've ever heard of. Dallas Cowboys play in the stadium they built. New York Times prints their newspapers in the building that they built. Intel, Tesla, bridges on the Mississippi, you name it, right here, George Fisher doing that. Or not George Fisher, but WW Steel. Amazing what Oklahomans do. When you pop a top on a beverage, you know, like your Diet Dr. Pepper over there, or if, you know, or the beverage of your choice, odds are one You know, there's about a 1 in 6 chance that that pop top was made right here in Oklahoma City. 13% of the entire market in the United States is done right here. How many lids do they make? 14 billion a year. Billion with a B. There's 150 people that do that. Those are some busy little bees, right? 14, that's 45 pop tops for every living, breathing American in a year. You know, and they're doing it right here. So we've got a great community, a great industry. There's so many things, you know, that you get out and see. And if you're inclined, you can turn on the I Hate You from the Left channel, or the I Hate You from the Right channel, or you can get on Hatebook and hate each other there. Or, I mean, there's just so many things that you can do to feel bad about yourself. Or you can get out, like so many of you do with your businesses, and you just try to make life better around you. And whatever the problems or the issues that we have in the world, they're not going to be solved by government, and they're certainly not going to be solved by some national draconian program that's going to make life more efficient, cost-effective, and good. It's going to be done by local businesses, local communities getting involved to try to fix the issue. Like CVS Pharmacy. We go in there and get our prescriptions filled, right? It's a national chain, but how does that affect us locally? Well, I was down in Shawnee and talking to two very intelligent pharmacists. They were telling me about a national program with CVS to try to help combat the opioid crisis. There's probably not a family out there that's not affected in some form or fashion by this national epidemic. And what are they doing? Well, they're putting these receptacles, they're kind of like mailboxes. You can put something in, but it's really hard to get something out. Drugs that have expired, opiates that have expired. And I thought, well, that's nice, nice gesture. Like, how many drugs do people turn in, And they said 160 tons in a year nationwide. It's like, holy cow. I mean, who would have thought? Because they're doing something like that. But they're going even a step further, and they've gotten really smart. When Congress relaxed the laws that allowed people to just start putting higher opiates and pain medication and getting people addicted and creating a legalized heroin epidemic all across the country, you've got the businesses and pharmacies looking at how can they control that, how can they affect that. And what CVS decided to do was limit the number of prescriptions that will be filled if they're over a certain pain threshold of opiates. Now, I'm not a pharmacist to be able to give you all that scientific language there, and if you are, God bless you. But what they're doing is saying if it's over the norm, we're not going to fill it. We're just not going to fill it. We'll fill what the band of the norm is for opiates and that. Now, if you need specialized prescriptions, you can go do that. Whatever. Walmart was so impressed with what they were doing, they decided to do it for their pharmaceutical services. And so what you're seeing once again is communities trying to solve crisis, so you don't have, some pain and injury doc that is just writing prescriptions and getting people, not that would ever happen. No, we've got a nationwide epidemic. It is happening. And they're looking at innovative ways that the community can help affect that and impact that. If you're waiting on a law for Congress to fix that, you could be waiting all the way till you found dead in an elevator on opiates or something, right? So we can't just look to the government as our only way to try to affect solutions. We got to try to solve things locally. But a lot of good things going on, and it's just very encouraging to see and hear. I met with some folks on pensions today. Yesterday, I met with a wonderful gentleman. He was an immigrant that he had come in to our office. He was a World War II survivor. He was a boy in Hamburg, Germany during the Nazi era, and he came to the United States afterwards. And he was just a concerned citizen. He cares about our country. He cares about the security of it. He cared about a lot of personal issues. And just taking the time to talk with him, I think, I learned something from everybody that I talked to. Everybody. And we don't know what the future holds, but we can get a glimpse of it by talking to older people. Right? That have been a little further down the road, seen things that maybe we haven't. Deal with all of the, like Solomon said in Proverbs, there's nothing new under the sun, or in Ecclesiastes. I mean, there's nothing new. And so we've got to take the time to not polarize, but rather try to find solutions as a community. I've watched it in my time as a soldier. You go out and you see these communities shelling each other's villages, killing each other's children, all because they could no longer talk to one another. And you hear a lot of talk in our country today about we need to be more tolerant. I disagree. We need to be more accommodating. There's a difference. Tolerance says, well, Rick, you know, whatever, but I'll tolerate you. Right? Well, I mean, what's up with that? I don't have to agree, you know, with everybody, but I need to accommodate the fact that we have a great country that allows us to have different backgrounds, different passions, different things. But if we're just tolerant of one another, that's saying, well, I will accept you because I have to. Right? I'll be tolerant. And that's the wrong way to go. And when you go from accommodation down to toleration, you're already on a slippery slope. And I've watched this play out on a few continents as a warrior. And then you go from toleration and you slip the next step down to isolation. Not only do I don't tolerate those people, I don't even want to be around them. I don't even want to be around. They don't have anything to say that I want to hear. Right? And when you get into the isolation stage, what happens? You don't talk to one another. And if you don't talk to one another, then you begin to distrust one another. Why? Because you don't have any interaction with one another. And then suddenly all your problems are whose fault? Those guys, right? How do you know? Well, just look at them, right? We wouldn't have any of these problems if it weren't for, take your pick, isolation. And from that point you go down and then you fall into castigation, right? Not only do we not tolerate you and we don't want to be around you, but we're going to make your life more difficult for you to even do whatever it is you're doing. And then we get into the castigation stage in society. And then you go below that, it starts getting ugly. Elimination in some form or fashion. And I've watched that play out, and that's not the United States of America. Never has been. We've had periods in our history where we've done some of that. And I don't know where we're at right now. Are we 1840 to 1860 where we can't talk to each other anymore? And we're so politically divided and isolated where we can't put it together anymore? And then we start killing each other in America's fields and farms? Or are we 1950 to 1970 where we were probably just as divided, but we worked through it and we got beyond it? And I don't know. I don't know where we're at as a nation. We have to decide. We have to. And as for me, I've lived a life of nothing but contention in some form or fashion. Whether as a warrior defending my country, whether as a state lawmaker, and I said I had enough of that and left that. Thought I was done with politics. And 2 years later, I thought, well, maybe I could still serve my country. And so here we are. But we have to find a way where we're not so locked in to an isolated mentality that we can't listen to and learn from one another. And so the reason I share that is because one of the things that I've seen as I've gone around to the community here these last couple of weeks is these are the types of things that are on people's minds. Okay, the tax reform is great, economic growth is great, things are going good, but people have a little bit of angst about the future. And they're not sure where it's going. That's true in the business community. That's true in just, people with their social agendas or whatever it might be, good causes, whatever. People have a little bit of angst. And it's kind of been surprising to me because, and it's a theme that seems to be springing up everywhere. So I thought I'd just do a preemptive strike today and throw it out there by way of encouragement and say, hey, look, we have a great country. We have a resilient people. What we need to be is not swept up by somebody else's strife, but we need to be leaders ourselves in our communities to inspire other folks to make good, to get out there and do what's right, whether people are going to or not. In infantry terms, you post security on it and you ignore it, and you move on toward the objective. You don't get caught up in all the little sniping that's going on, but you'll never get to where you're going if you don't. So with that, I'm happy to take your questions in the remaining time that we have together. Who's got one or two or 12 or? Yeah? Yes, sir.
I agree with everything you said, and thank you for coming today.
You bet.
As the person that in November we decide to send back to Washington,
Sure.
what can you do to bring your message of let's figure this out and let's work together? How do you, as the only person besides a couple of old guys in the Senate, that respect my interests, how do you fight the tide of populism that's in the White House right now? And how do you concrete? Because, like you said, deeds not words, right?
Right.
You're a politician. Your words, in many ways, are your deeds. So, how do you plan to push back and try and bring people towards the middle when the head of the Republican Party and the President of the United States is clearly way over there and basically doing all the things that you said? This is a train wreck, people, and we need to stop doing it.
Right. Well, I sat down with a lady yesterday in the office, and she was, worked up on a lot of things. I said, well, ma'am, rather than being worked up, just set an appointment, come down and talk with me. And, and she had been, she was one of our daily callers. And, but she finally came in. We sat down over a cup of coffee. I gave her an hour and a half. It was interesting in the comments that she was making. In her case, they were from a progressive viewpoint. But what was fascinating to me is that they were comments that if you had flipped parties and rolled back 6 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, you wouldn't have known. You'd change the name, it had been the same narrative. And here's what some of them were. Dividing the country unlike any time we've ever seen. Dividing us on race, on culture, distancing our allies, embracing our enemies. That sounded like stuff that people ran on 6 years ago, right, as Republicans. And now we're hearing it from Democrats. And I'm not saying that either one is right. I'm saying we've got to put things in context. And here's my observations. I'm a student of history. Our last 18 years of presidential elections have been some of the most razor-thin elections that we've had in our history. So it shows you we're a very polarized, divided country. Sometimes we've had Republican prevail, sometimes we've had a Democrat prevail, whatever. But none of them have been landslides. I mean, look at Bush 43's election with Al Gore. I mean, that was razor-thin close, right? And then we look in 2008. That was not a sweep of an election. It was a historic election, but it was close. Now, the re-elects for all of these have been better margins, and we get that. Same way with President Trump and Mrs. Clinton, close. So I think it speaks more to the polarization of our country than any particular individual that occupies the White House. And
I actually asked you what you would do.
what I would do is what I've always done. I like to think strategically. I like to think about actions in the future. Anyone that knows me knows that, I'm a peacemaker at heart. I've seen the most terrible things that human beings can do to one another and have participated in that. I've had to do horrible things with my own hands against other human beings. And I just won't go there ever again, ever. And when I hear politicians on both sides of the aisle pontificating about we're going to do this and we're going to do that and all of this rhetoric, you know, I just don't even participate. I just don't even participate. Well, I mean, why? You know, there's a proverb that says, don't answer a fool according to their folly. There's another one that says, answer a fool according to his folly. Okay, that seems a little bit contradictory, but in one way, it's saying, look, if somebody is making some stupid claims and trying to get you to go over into that, don't even bother with that. Now, if they're making accusatory claims against you and facts, then you can answer that. And I think that that's some of the problem that we have is everybody wants to get their Andy Warhol 15 minutes of fame. Why? Ponder this. Every American that made this country run 100 years ago is dead. Are we all in agreement on that? Okay. Well, she wasn't running the country. She wasn't running the country at 2 years of age. Yeah. But I say that to say this, as important as we think we are, the world will keep continuing as long as God intends for it to do so, and the planet will keep spinning on its axis. And so we can't take ourselves so seriously that we wreck the future of our country, that we wreck the outlook of that. And the way I operate, I thought when I was sent by you guys to go do the job, that I ought to do that. I ought to focus on the work. I ought to study the issues. I didn't know it, but University of Virginia study, they did it, and I think it was, I forget the name of the foundation or the fellowship that did the study, but me and John Katko were named the 2 most effective lawmakers out of the 2014 class, and I was in the top 15 of all of Congress in terms of productivity. I'm like, gosh, I felt like I wasn't getting anything done. And, but I've had 5 bills make it to 2 presidents' desks. I've had over 4 dozen amendments signed into law. I didn't realize that people have been there 30 years and have never had a single bill signed into law. I didn't know that. But that's not why I was doing it. It's not how much you can produce or what you see something, you try to build consensus, and then you work in the space that you have agreement on. If you don't, if you go back to the polarization, you never negotiate the non-negotiables. Why? Okay, you might feel good. You might shove your face on Fox News or MSNBC, and you feel good about yourself. Okay, how long does that last? That long. And then the next day, you got to pop off about something else you don't know, right? And then you got to get on a panel with 4 or 5 people on a 24-hour news network that they don't know what they're talking about either. And so why participate in all of that? How about just put your shoulder into it and try to get something done? That's what I do. And if that's something that helps the country, great. And if it's something that the country no longer needs me, I'll come home, fly my plane, sleep like a baby, and live at peace the rest of my life. I'm determined to do it one of these days, come home and live a life of peace, and it will happen, God willing. But we can't take ourselves so seriously that we screw up our country. And I'm just not going to participate in those things. So you won't see me, nor have you seen me, try to create conflict or friction or badmouth different people or do that to try to improve my position. I don't think that's a way to get anything accomplished. And as a leader, and I've been leading things my whole life, that's not very inspiring, right? I mean, who wants to be inspired by somebody who's a jerk, right? So there you go. Yes, ma'am, and then sir. Sure. Yeah.
All of that, and you have the news with their agendas and everything, not asking you to take a stand.
Right.
Is this, I don't want you to go down that rabbit hole.
Sure.
How serious do you think these allegations are?
Well, as I look at,
Are they legitimate? Because
right.
we hear is what you hear on TV.
Sure.
The good part of it.
Right. Well, they were serious enough that charges were leveled in a judicial system. There was a jury. I've got faith in our justice system. I think most Americans, if presented the facts, will come to the right conclusion if they're given all the facts. We don't always get it right in a courtroom, but most of the time we do when you have a jury trial. I guess in the terms of Mr. Manafort and Mr. Cohen, I don't. To date, I've not seen any evidence that would show that he had any conspiracy or any collusion to do anything with Russia that had any impact on the outcome of the election. I still don't believe there's any evidence for that I've seen. Nothing has come forth in our hearings, nothing has come forth in our classified hearings that would provide that evidence. I've not seen it.
Because my husband and I were talking about this.
Yeah.
He got elected and everybody knew he was a womanizer. To me, that wasn't news. But the idea of, okay, now you violated campaign finance rules, trying to hide something that everybody already knew anyway. How dangerous is going, something weird going to get him, I guess?
I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what the evidence is. And here's why I say that. Every president that we've had since Nixon, people have wanted to impeach. Every one of them. Now, Nixon was real close to making that happen, right? And then we had Ford, ended up with the presidency, and the first president that was never elected by the people, which was interesting, and everybody was like, impeach him. He wasn't elected by the people. Remember that discussions in the 70s? And then it was Jimmy Carter, and it's like, he's a traitor. Look what he's doing with the fill in the blank. Impeach him. Right? And then Ronald Reagan was like, impeach him. And then we got to Clinton, and we did, right? And then it was Bush, and then it was Obama, and then it was Trump. Again, it's not a reflection on any one individual. It's a reflection on us as a nation and a culture and how we are respecting our institutions, how we are building our future as a nation. And we're all covered up in it. Both parties are guilty. As institutions, if we don't give them any respect, then they will receive no respect. If we don't respect our laws, then we pull down the pillars and we sit in the rubble, and then we blame each other as we're trying to figure out how it all tumbled down. Well, gosh, that's kind of an exercise in futility. So I have faith in our justice system. If there's evidence, they'll look at it. If it's not there, they won't be found guilty. In terms of the president himself, collusion is not a high crime or misdemeanor. We don't even know what it is being defined. And what's interesting is that the framers of the Constitution, they did not define high crimes and misdemeanors. Do you realize that? It's not defined in the Constitution. What is it? Well, that's for in the case of times where we have had it, in the impeachment of President Clinton, it's defined by the Senate. I mean, they set up a court and they have a jury-like situation to determine what those things are. And so it's a unique system of checks and balances. But I think one of the best things that we can do, if people have committed wrongdoing, we need to investigate it. If they've done it and the evidence is there, we need to hold them to account, no matter who they are. And then if they are, in the case of high-ranking officials, they need to be held to account and removed. And that would be true no matter what party it is. But in terms of evidence today that would demand the president's impeachment, I'm all open to receiving it. Please bring it. Happy to examine it. Is the president somebody that I would emulate in personal conduct? Absolutely not. My mother raised me different. My faith in Jesus Christ tells me to act different, right? So I can't defend that type of behavior. How could I? But I also can't defend other types of behavior. And there's a reason Oklahomans rejected Mrs. Clinton in favor of Bernie Sanders. Not because they're socialists, but because they didn't trust Mrs. Clinton in the Democratic primary. And that's why Oklahoma went with a socialist. I mean, that just seems So, look, and Trump, President Trump, interestingly, was nobody's first choice in Oklahoma. You do realize that in the Republican Party. 4 of the 5 congressional districts voted for Ted Cruz. The 5th district here voted for Marco Rubio. Mr. Trump was Oklahoman's 3rd choice in this district. So, we've got to look at it into the context. Oklahomans are pretty civil people. And we like the underdog, and we like a sense of fairness, and when we see people doing that. But at the same time, people knew that we needed to improve the economy, we needed to deregulate, we needed to do tax reform, we needed to handle nefarious actors internationally differently. Okay, now who could do that? I don't know, but those were the factors that entered into the 2016 election. I wasn't running for president. I was running for Congress. I was open and honest about my feelings on all of that even before the election, as I'm wont to do. I'll often telegraph what I believe before a vote. Imagine that. So I don't know. We'll see what happens with Mr. Trump. I've seen no evidence to date that would cause me to believe that he would be removed from office. Maybe it's there. I haven't seen it. Other questions? Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah. You bet. Yeah. Well, and people before us too. Yeah. Great. Yeah. It's awesome. Yeah. That's exactly right. Right. But know what was going on. Now we can't get the message out. Right. We've got lots of good things. That's the single biggest challenge, I think, for most small communities. I agree. They've got the budget, they've got the media. The smaller communities are all around are struggling. No, it's true. So that's the only thing I think that we can't get help from Congress for that. But yet it's a common thread of consistency of getting people to look at unity, regardless of your political. Sure. No, I think you hit on a key thing is how do we take the time to exchange ideas without it becoming, a food fight every time? Or how do you get through the morass of social media and tweeting and online news? I mean, what do you go to for your sources? And, people aren't going to go to the homepage of the city of Bethany to get, it's just the kind of the reality of the way it is. You want them to. In fact, most of the questions you get calls on, they could have known if they'd have just logged in and looked at it, right? We get that a lot. In fact, I was asked yesterday by this woman, she says, well, I didn't know about that. When are you going to tell people? I said, well, ma'am, if you subscribed to our newsletter, you'd have known all of that. And you thought her hand was going to wither having to sign up to, my newsletter or something. But it's just the way that it is sometimes. I will say this, that I have led in very confusing environments where people were trying to kill each other and where the stakes were high and the decisions had to be life and death and sometimes instantaneous. And if you can do it in that environment, then we can probably sort it out when we have a more peaceful environment to deliberate and figure it out. And in every case, communication is done by getting out and seeing things, by leaders leading, by people inspiring, and by people going and using those that are active, leveraging that leadership, and then breaking down the task. One person can't lead 100 people, but one person can lead 3 to 5, right? So you just find 3 to 5 helpers, and then they can do the same, and before you know it, and you know this from being in city government and planning and helping in different things, that when you do get some good people leading in a direction, you can get amazing things accomplished. You can get amazing investment. You can truly change some stuff and make a difference. But is it easy? No. And too often in our political process, I often joke that politics is America's favorite shooting sport, right? And we don't elect who we like, we elect who we want to blame next, right? And yet we're all a reflection of who we are, because we are unique as a republic in the United States that we govern ourselves. We govern ourselves. There are not many nations that do that, but we do. We govern ourselves from the top all the way down to the local level. And so if we have the idea to empower those that are going to move forward and empower those that are going to inspire and lead, then we'll probably be okay as a nation. And historically, we've seemed to do that. We have some bad actors from time to time. Like we were just discussing, right? Bad behaviors, bad acting, bad, it's like, oh my gosh, how do you, but right now, that's what we've got. And you could have said the same thing about the last 3 presidents, right? People are very polarized. Yes, sir. Yep.
We were sitting here, you mentioned some things you hope to accomplish in your remaining time until you do move on to those more peaceful pastures.
Sure.
What are some of the things you have on your agenda that you personally would like to accomplish before you leave?
Well, we're trying to cut waste a lot, right? I think one of the things that we need as a nation, and we'll never be able to pass it in Congress, but that doesn't mean that it can't be done, and that's to require, like we have here in the state of Oklahoma, a balanced budget. Require it constitutionally. The only way you can do a constitutional amendment, there's only one of 2 ways. One is Congress sends it to the states, states ratify it, comes back. The other way is the states send it to the Congress under an Article 5. And I think we've got to figure out a way to balance the books. Oklahoma, having a balanced budget amendment in Oklahoma doesn't mean that we don't waste money, but it does limit how much we can waste, right? And I think that that's a healthy thing. How far will we get on that in my tenure? I don't know, but it is something that I also worked on in state government. I think for me, having a strong military, yes, we have debt. Yes, we have a military. There's a lot of cost and expense there. But as I read the Constitution, where it says that we need to defend the country and provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, I think we've got it backwards. We are providing the general welfare and trying to promote the common defense, and I think we have it backwards. If we don't have a republic that we can defend, all of our economics is not going to matter anyway, because it's all gone. So as a warrior now in Congress, and our numbers are rapidly diminishing. When I was elected, we had 107 veterans in Congress in both houses combined, 535, 107 vets. Today it's 96. That's a problem. And the numbers aren't getting higher, they're getting lower. Why? Because fewer people serve. No draft anymore. Vietnam era are hitting retirement and leaving Congress. And so there's just fewer in the population to draw from. And we've got to have people, to bring that type of experience on our national defense issues. So I see that as a real role. I play an awful lot in foreign affairs. I meet with a lot of heads of state around the world. I've traveled to 3.5 dozen countries since I've been in office. And they're real junkets, like, going to Zimbabwe or going out with special forces teams into Niger, and coming back with strange skin diseases and stuff. It's not glamorous work, but somebody's got to do it. And I am uniquely equipped to do some of that because of my background. But you need those types of voices in Congress to affect, because those are major policies and they can affect all of us. They can affect our sons and daughters, our industries, they can affect our economy, they can affect all of those things. So that's one of my goals, is to see how we can draw more bipartisanship. I founded the Warriors Caucus. It's largely composed of combat veterans in the House of Representatives that served in battle or did hard things in uniform. And we have 27 members. Not a lot eligible, but we got most of those that are. And I think that's important to work on those national security issues and continue that. In terms of legislation, most of my legislative successes and efforts have been in cutting waste and trying to eliminate stupid. It's hard to do that, but we've cut over $4 billion so far. And the other thing that we've still got roughly $23 billion in legislative effort that we've authored. Our office has authored, and then we've identified $80 billion, but we've actually turned over 20 of that into pieces of legislation. 4 of that, which has been signed into law by presidents. So that's good, and I want to continue to do and work on some of that as well. Well, it's kind of been our tradition in some aspects. I mean, when we were wearing tricorn hats, it was everybody helping whoever was out there standing in the militia line, right? So that's kind of our roots. In the Civil War, you had people dragging, sutlers' carts around and trying to provide the troops with things that they needed at a price. Sometimes the goods were good, and sometimes they weren't. That's where we got words in our English language like shoddy and different things. And then in World War I, you had women go to the trenches and pass out donuts and do volunteer nursing with the American Red Cross. You had YMCA men go and help provide relief camps and do different things for the doughboys in the trenches. World War II saw the same thing. We've had a tradition of civilians on the battlefield for a long time. But the problem you get into when we did the Hague and Geneva Conventions, and we're signatories to both, you get into laws of land warfare on a battlefield. And civilians have certain protected status, but if they're doing direct aid to armies, now it becomes complicated. It's one thing to pass out a donut, it's a different pass out ammunition. And so now that becomes a little more convoluted. And I think that the contractor piece was people wanting to cut the military and save money. Well, we can contract that, but what do you do with a Kellogg Brown and Root trucker who is driving on a road in Iraq, hits an IED, he gets out of his truck, and now he's captured, and then they put him in an orange suit and saw off his head on television? That's happened. That's a problem. And so when we're going to make laws that put contractors on the battlefield, we have to think through those laws of land warfare. And we've got to provide the types of tools and the moral clarity to know what we're doing and who we put in harm's way. Was it really better to do that? Or was it better to have a military truck driver that could defend themselves and do different things? And those are the types of questions we need to be asking. Personally, I think some things make sense domestically on what contractors can do, but when you go into harm's way, you probably ought to have warriors doing those tasks. And I come at that position just from a prisoner of my own experience. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Once we get beyond all of the vitriolic rhetoric.
And I hope we do, right?
What is happening in Congress on a bipartisan level?
Yeah.
I know you gave a good speech the other day on immigration
Yep.
reform. I know there are other issues going on where people are working together to make things
Sure.
happen. Can you share?
Yeah, sure can. One of the things, you won't see a lot of new legislation being taken up between now and November. And in September, we'll be scrambling to try to get the 12 appropriation measures done to fund government. We scramble every year before 1 October, and then we never make the deadline. It's interesting how that works. But we'll try it again this year. But in terms of new legislation, I think one of the things that you'll see on immigration, or even old, there is a bill that's making its way as a joint effort from the Agricultural Committee and the Judiciary Committee that will address a program to create 450,000 worker visas for agriculture. I support it. It's needed. We need it. I think the number is about a third of what reality is. But when we had this Bracero Accord from 1942 to 1964, we had a program like that. They didn't have a cap on it, and we didn't have an illegal immigration problem as a result, but people would come in with credentials, they would work, they were employed, they had verification, they would go back and forth. We're trying to learn from our past and history to see what programs were working. And this one's it's getting some legs. It's bipartisan. Henry Cuellar from San Antonio, Democrat, is a good guy. I've traveled with him. He is the Democratic author of this. And then you got Mike Conaway and others, there's agricultural chairman. This has promise, and it has a lot of bipartisan support right now, just to address the agricultural worker needs. And as I have said, we can import workers or we can import food. Take your pick. What you're not going to get is Native Americans, I don't mean Indian, but native-born Americans to go and do agricultural jobs. The jobs are there, the unemployment offices are there, and they just never seem to meet. So we've got to face the reality of we have people willing to work those agricultural jobs, and we have an industry that's willing to accept those workers. What we need is an immigration policy that allows that, as we have historically in our past, but doesn't necessarily grant a permanent residency or doesn't necessarily trying to, okay, you can become a citizen. Well, they don't want to become a citizen. So this is something that is a positive move that we may see come to the floor in September. Great question. Well, let me take her, and then I'll come. And then we had, was it you, Paige? No? Okay, back here. Sure. Right. Right.
I'm curious from your perspective in Washington, are there any groups that are not in either of those formats that are really making change or having an impact that you say, that's a different way that we could, in the middle of a road,
Sure. Yeah, and I think there is. I don't belong to a lot of caucuses except for the one that I founded, Warriors Caucus. I was invited to join the Freedom Caucus. I was invited to join the Republican Study Group. I was invited to join the Tuesday Group. I was invited to join, all of them. I'm not interested in really any of that. I've been defending the Constitution since I was 18. And at Kerr Junior High in my 8th grade civics class with Mr. Parks, he taught me how government worked, and so it's like, I don't need a political caucus to hold me to some scorecard so that they can beat me about the head and shoulders or extol my virtues as being, uber right or uber not. I don't care about any of that. I know what the Constitution says, and I know how to defend it, and so that doesn't make me perfect, it doesn't make me right, but it at least gives me the basis of study. There are groups that are trying to work more on the overlapping circles. It doesn't mean that you give up being staunchly conservative or staunchly progressive. But what it does mean is that you're going to work in the space where you agree rather than working on the polls. And if you work, I learned a long time in high pressure negotiations and courses that I took in the military, you never negotiate the non-negotiables. I mean, why would you? You're not going to get anywhere. So you negotiate the overlapping ground and start in the middle of that, build trust, you can widen the circle. I think we have some interesting groups. There was an effort, some outside folks and also members of Congress, about 15 members that we met 2 months ago on how to reform Congress. The last huge legislative reform on reforming the way Congress runs and how it's structured was done in the 1980s. Prior to that, it was done in the 1950s. Interestingly, Mike Monroney from this district was involved in both of those efforts, one as a young new lawmaker and then two as the old seasoned lawmaker. And I just found that interesting that he was a part of those reform efforts. And there are a number of us looking at who does that group include? It's not people that you could even pin the tail on and figure out who they are. It's people that are involved in all different spectrums of it, but realize what we're doing, we probably got to find a way where we're just not running to the microphones, retreating to our polar positions, and then move from there. We have had polarization since the founding of our country, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we've not been able to pass major things with bipartisan effort that's been good for the country. We have. So I think that for my part, I've tried to participate in those things that I think that could help us. I don't think very much the same way that people in New Hampshire think, or Vermont. They think very differently than I do here. But I recognize after having traveled through both of those states, in fact, I've been to all 50 of our states. We have a marvelous country. They truly represent the people there, and they really think those things. And so that's why they're representatives and why they're elected. So you don't have to agree with them, but you have to at least figure out what would be to the mutual benefit of the country and put the country first instead of just ourselves. And so that's what I try to do. Well, okay. Last question before I get the hook. Yes, ma'am. No. No, well, let me tell you why. I never thought I would be a member of Congress. I've always had a political itch that I felt like I might scratch one day, because when you're in the military, you study politics a lot. You never know where the crazy people are going to send you, right? So you keep up with all of those things, and you watch what the political decisions were, because your training, your pay, where you get deployed, what bases stay open, or where you end up fighting is all determined by people in Washington. So, you always paid attention to it. But I never thought, I want to be the next field marshal or whatever. No, I mean, that was just not something. And one thing I will tell you, and no matter what endeavor that I've done, whether soldier, businessman, author, speaker, and now politician, hard to say, right? Whatever you lead, you should give it your best, and you should do your best. But it's not necessarily a motivation to say, okay, I'm only going to serve in this office so I can get to the next one, or do the next one, or whatever. I mean, I'm just not motivated by that. Opportunity is there. That's how I ended up being the 5th District Congressman. I was out of politics, purely disgusted with it after one term in the state Senate. I thought, well, I've done that science experiment. I'm out, right? And then 2 years later, Dr. Coburn retired early. James Langford ran for his seat. 5th District was wide open, and I'm standing there with a bag of skills on national security, watching a lot of national security things going on, and I thought, maybe I could help my country again. And I thought, I don't want to look back on my life thinking, there was this one time So I said, win or lose, I'm going to do it. If I lose, I'll shave myself in the mirror, and if I win, well, then I guess it was meant to be. And that's really how I look at it. So, no, I've not even thought. One, I'm just, I don't have a huge political machinery, and anyone that knows, you know, I didn't come from a family of great means growing up in Del City, Oklahoma. I'm the first college graduate ever of my family. Being a father of 5 children, me and my wife raised 5 children on soldier's pay. We didn't save a lot. We had matchsticks at the end of the moves, and you know, we made a good living and a good life. But you know, there's not this independent wealth where I can just go out and get. You know, so it would take a lot of resources to do something like that. And if God would intend for things to happen, they can, but it's not something that, you know, okay, how do I arrange this, and who do I hobnob with that, and scratch elbows with on that? I like to live a peaceful life without contention when I can. So, yeah. Well, I appreciate y'all, and thanks for letting me come and visit with you. And it's good to be back in Bethany, and good to be back at the chamber. It's been a couple of years, and you know, it's just good to see everybody. I'm not up for re-election in the primary, so you know, on any of that, I'm not up. There's no runoff for me next week, so I'm not here to ask for your, you know, any of that, because I'm not on the ballot next week. But I would encourage you to go vote, go do that. People will be counting on you. And looking at this crowd, you all probably have already done it. You've probably already mailed it in, I'm suspecting, most of you. But thank you, and thank you, Craig, for letting me join you today. And it's an honor to serve.